Today we're going to be taking a look at a replay submitted by Julius, who's currently in the gold rank. We'll be breaking down his Ruse gameplay and just try to highlight what he's doing well and identify the things that he needs to fix in order to get better. I've collaborated with my coach, Don Artie, for this video, and for those who don't know, Don Artie is a seasoned pro with a history of high-level play. He's taken down top players like the Viper and many others in the early days of the game, and he's got a unique way of thinking about the game that makes his coaching style really interesting and effective. If you want your own gameplay reviewed or just want to join an awesome community of players, make sure to join our coaching Discord. There'll be a link in the description for that. And yeah, enjoy. While we are watching the early game here, we can
This is a surprising start.
We can already now see a little bit of an interesting beginning here. Usually when you have these Ruse build orders, you open up with about 2 to 4 villagers on the hunting cabin and you pick your closest starting wood line. So there's already a little bit of a big idle time mistake here, where villagers are simply not handling the early start effectively. You want to have your hunting cabin placed on this wood line. You want to construct your scouts out of this one. And then you just want to quickly get to your sheep and gather that. Your scouts are going to be doing pretty much all of the gold collection through bounty, hunting, and that's going to be pretty much it. The rest of the villages are just going to be in food until you go next stage.
Yeah, so we're down a villager now, right? Because of the idle time.
Yes.
Which is rather problematic. Yeah, so this is always this funny thing when people watch their own replays, or when you see this, it's pretty obvious, right? Like you would think, okay, you're pulling 6 vills to rush up a hunting cabin, causing idle time because you're not gathering food.
Yeah.
But the funny thing about this sort of stuff is that a lot of people are like, well, this doesn't happen to me. Surely I don't make these mistakes. And it's just really unforgiving whenever you watch somebody's replay. It's just, you know, everything is going to be visible. And yeah, that was quite a rough start. I would have just picked the closest wood, like you said, and just built it with like 3 vills probably.
Yeah, so whatever build you decide to go for, there are a bunch of different openers. But when you do weird stuff like, okay, I want to get a couple extra gold on my hunting cabin and put this on this wood line because it says to get a few more, don't take that into consideration. You want to sort of minimize idle time early on, because what's going to happen is we're going to be delayed and we're not going to get up at the correct time that we should be up. This is also only a 2 scout opener. I don't know about you, Don, but I typically like to go for 3 scouts simply because it's better at contesting bounty. So yeah, I don't know about you. What do you think? 2 or 3 scouts?
I like going. I think if you're anywhere below Conqueror level, you should play 2, because you can tell this one is idle, the other one, you know, they're not always active. So if you have 3, you're just spending 70 food on having an extra idle unit.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that a lot of people don't appreciate enough, is that you should play towards your own elo. You know, people would just copy a build order they see at Conqueror level, but that build order doesn't necessarily work at your own level.
Okay.
So I would play 3 scout, yes, but I would recommend him to play 2 scout.
Okay. So what about the argument that you should be imitating players at higher level to become like them? Do you think that because of the limitations of an average player, then something like handling 3 scouts early and thinking about placements of Kremlin and all the things that goes into the beginning, do you think that it would be better to sort of cut off some of those things that don't work anyways?
I think it's one of the most made mistakes, is that people want to play the full game. Like they would tune into a streamer and they see them handle all these different things and, you know, micromanage these small stuff. I think it's one of the most common mistakes among players, that they want to play the full game instead of just build on the basics. So, for example, if you're in gold, like in my opinion, you should never get ego tax. You should never build a monastery. You should never do a lot of stuff that is like small benefits to your economy or whatever, and just focus on laying those foundation bricks first. So just, you know, having vill production, spending your resource on army, all that stuff.
I think that makes sense. I mean, you want to focus on the basics before you start actually trying to play the same game that people play at a way higher level. Because if you can't make villages, how are you going to execute any strat, right?
Yeah, and I think common downfall for players that they would try to do everything a little bit, and then you kind of just end up doing everything at a low level. Whereas if you just really focus on those fundamentals first, then you can kind of build onto those bricks eventually, and like you can get a higher elo just by doing the basics right.
We have a little bit of a scout pathing issue, I would say. Something like having the scout on the TC is something that we often see in these leagues, losing scouts to the TC is definitely not something we want to see, because we need them. We're not done collecting bounty, and we still need to scout the map as well. Plus, in the mid game, it's nice to have multiple scouts now that you already have them, to use those to find the info about the game that you need in order to make the correct decisions. It's already scary now that we're close to losing the second one too. So if there was a lot of vills here, we would definitely have lost that scout had the player here been active. Again, back to the whole idea of should we play 2 or 3 scout. We will see issues like this when we sort of limit the capability of our civilization going 3 scouts. If you are at the high level, you know that you can make use of those 3 and get a large amount of sheep. But obviously, if you only play 2 and you lose one of them, obviously we're also going to be down on sheep, and that's going to affect the way that this game is going to go. We need to go out and pocket resources earlier, or God forbid, make farms, and we don't want to make farms early.
Well, he has to close it there, and I mean, I try to not focus on the obvious mistakes. Like, okay, yeah, he lost a scout. We can all see that that's something that shouldn't happen. But it just the thing with AB4, especially if you're not playing at a very high level, it's just like no matter the size of the mistake you made, you can still come back. So I like to just move on and just focus on the what's up. So he has the deer there. I would have shift clicked those vills to get on the deer. I like the original spot of first table a little better because you could have just moved them back to deer. And yeah, he wants to get. You need to get scouting info. Here is really important because we want to know what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. It's crucial that we know what our opponent's opening with. Are they towering up and just turtling, or are they going to go for aggression? A lot of people will open binary, and whereas the build orders always say, we're just going to go fast castle with a few units to defend, a lot of people also essentially go for aggression, and those are things that we need to look out for.
So I would have liked to see the vills that are in gold should have went to the hunt, because that's where they were in the area, and then you could have moved some vills from sheep to gold, because you're definitely going to run out of sheep relatively quickly.
Yeah, there comes a point where we're out of sheep, and then there's a long distance where we need to walk. This will create some idle time in our food collection, which means, okay, we might run out of food for villagers or night production, so it's better to split up the economy and have maybe 50% of your food coming from deer, so that when you do run out of the sheep, you still have food coming in.
Right, and I think this is something that I've always done, and maybe I'm like somewhat known for the fact that, let's say I'm like playing Tally, I'm often on like 3 different berry boosters at once instead of just having everything in one place. It really sucks when all your eco goes idle, and especially what happens when you're a low-rated player is that you would be focusing on like controlling your knight or something, and then you just have 10 vills standing under your TC for too long. Yeah, that could be rough.
So now the player Julius here is switching over to what seems to be way more heavy aggression instead of the second TC play or fast castle play that Roos can also opt in for. What do you think about that move here versus Byzantines?
I like it. I always advocate for people to play aggressive. It's just like this entire 2TC thing and all that sort of stuff, it's just not required yet. You can definitely play that style, but you don't have to. The main thing I disliked here is the fact that we don't really see what our opponent is really doing. Like, we know he's on berries and he's mining a little bit of gold, but we don't know if he like need archers or anything. We don't know if he has spears. He's probably gonna dive that Vill, which I'll probably not do. Oh, he didn't cancel. He canceled his attack or something. So, yeah, I would have made that archery range a lot faster, and the blacksmith wasn't he built the blacksmith first, which was the wrong way around.
Yeah, so there's some downtime in the army, and it can't really perform without the archers due to the fact that there's limits in it here, and this will... Of course, there's some idle time now for the enemy. There's no oil being gathered. But again, this didn't really do too much besides delay that. We're still full gathering food, and the opponent's still in gold as well, so... Something like having 2 sides to attack from. Some people struggle a lot with it because it requires the ability to pay attention to multiple areas, and I don't know how you feel about that in gold, if it's something that you should be practicing or you should just try to keep your units alive. What do you think?
I think it's like it's gonna be hard to attack on 2 sides, but it's also gonna be harder for your opponent to defend 2 sides, right? Like, yeah, you can just send your knight in and just make sure you avoid the TC essentially. So I like what he's doing here. This is fine.
Yeah.
He did go on berries instead of the hunt, which there's quite some gather rate difference there.
Yeah, there's a big difference between the way that the different food sources perform. So some have higher and some have lower food income. Deer being one of the highest ones, boar being the highest on land maps. You can get a little bit higher food income from gathering from shoreline fish with your villages, but typically you want to avoid going on berries early, especially also because this is a safe resource. You want to, especially when you're doing aggression and you have the map control, you're pushing them, the focus of the game is on their base, you're not being harassed or anything. You should try to gather these more outliers simply because they have a higher gather rate and you're not under any threats. So,
yeah, I think we're gonna be building up some gold bank here. I don't assume he's gonna switch those to hunt. And now that we've kind of did our blacksmith tags, at least the two important ones, maybe we still want to get rams as well.
yeah.
We don't need that much gold anymore. It's just for night production at this point. Yeah, I generally recommend everybody to play without a build order. To be honest, I think I'm not sure if he is or not, but I recommend people to avoid them for the most part, because at some point you will get the game enough that it'd be like, oh, okay, this makes sense as a build. But if it's not something that makes sense to you logically, it's just like, oh, people are doing this, so I'm gonna copy it. Then you're not really getting much from it because you're not really understanding. And if you're not understanding something, it's insanely hard to play. Like, let's say you're just following step by step, and this Mongol player sends horsemen into you, like, oh no, I can't follow my steps anymore, so I'm lost.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're thinking actively, and the builder is just there to aid you in your like it makes sense in your thought process, then you know how to adjust. But if you don't know how to adjust, if you're just copying something, it's pretty useless in my opinion.
I think that's a valid opinion to have. I do also find that a lot of people don't actually even know what they should, what the options they have, and that makes the thinking part a lot harder. But you have a good point. You shouldn't stick to the build order if it's in the way of actually thinking, right? It's a good way maybe for new players to get into something and just get started. But you shouldn't just say, okay, I'm going to get a build order to play a dark age strat. And if you want to go for a dark age strategy where you're rushing, that's not going to be a very common thing to do. So there might not be the most refined build order. Practicing macroing and just in general how things work, how the spears interact with units after the dark age rush, what do you do with them, stuff like that. Find that info and then apply it in your games so that you can go for these strategies when they're actually useful. Instead of doing the same thing every game, because sometimes that same thing will work and sometimes it won't.
So we're kind of hitting a more broader topic here, but let's focus back on this game from Julius. I think the main thing that I want to know is what's going on in my opponent's base. Like, we have the scout there. You can get relatively close to a TC if you pay attention to the scout. Obviously, you don't want to run into it. Aside from the fact that we know he has a blacksmith and that can lead us to assumptions, I would rather just actually have the knowledge. So obviously this army size is, at minute 11, is extremely small compared to where you could be at. Yeah, so this was likely, right? We saw the blacksmith, so it was likely that our opponent was mixing in more units. But if we used our scout, then we could have avoided this and we would not have been caught out of position. We could have just chilled in the middle of the map. A lot of these games just come down to if you're macroing right, then you have like literally double the army, and then everything just becomes so easy. I think some people will argue that you need micro and everything like that, but it's all just in the macro stuff for the most part at this elo.
Yeah. I have a point here on the military front. I'm seeing an issue, which is the multitasking part. It seems to me that Julius is really just hard focusing on trying to attack from multiple sides, but he's never actually doing it. And that means that his army size is already small, but it's significantly smaller than it actually is because he's so spread out. And if he's going to take fights like this, to me, again, going with that same argument that you should play fewer scouts if you don't have the APM for it, you should also just try to attack from one side if you can't attack effectively from multiple, right? So just bunch up your army here so you don't lose units unnecessarily, and maybe you could actually take a fight that's beneficial for you.
Keep things simplistic is always good. Like I said earlier, if you feel like you're going to be able to do it where you're going to be able to attack from two sides, then go for it. You're like, your opponent's going to struggle against it. But if you don't feel like you're not going to be able to, then just don't have like an ego about it. Don't push yourself up to limits that you can't reach, at least for now.
Yeah.
and just have one big army. I almost always play with one big army. I'm not much of a raider because I keep things really simple for myself as well. I have limited APM compared to average player at my level, and I play towards my own strengths. Right, he's going on another berry patch instead of going on the deer, so he must really hate those deer.
Yeah. I wonder what's keeping him from going on them. It seems to be quite counterproductive. You have placed
Yeah,
the
this is
Kremlin here, and it's in a good position covering this. You are not prone to be raided, but the moment you go to another side here, your army is the furthest away that it can be. So even if there was a raid here, one single horseman, let's say you fought with the villagers, it would maybe be fine. But if it's a group of 5, then you have an issue, and then you have to run all the way back.
Yeah, this was essentially like a triple unnecessary negative where you had a long walking time for a slower resource with more risk. The thing with the blacksmith that we talked about earlier, it's just like, even without info, just when you see a blacksmith, people are never gonna just have a blacksmith and do nothing with it. So it's always the easiest way to have info. So as soon as I saw that blacksmith, I was like, okay, the opponent's staying feudal for a while, and that's what we're seeing here.
Yeah.
And this fight should be quite manageable. He just kind of has to kite towards the trade post. Just avoid damage from the longbows while taking down the spears.
Yeah.
This should be a quite easy fight, but I think without micro you would lose this fight pretty hard.
Yeah, I don't think Julius' strength is micro necessarily, if multitasking is also an issue, but he is doing something that I really like, which is he sort of groups all of his units together, which makes his units harder to pick off. So, and then he's also microing onto the spearmen, which is probably the most important thing to do in this fight. The knights can be A moved, that's fine, but something like taking out the spears quickly is good, and then there's more reinforcements coming here as well. So overall, pretty good. I think these knights here need to kill the horsemen, otherwise all the archers will die.
Yeah, that's why you should do kiting, but it's just like, I'm not gonna be too nitpicky about the micro. Like I always say, just focus on the macro stuff and just, if you have double the army size, then you can mess these things up and still win. So
yeah, definitely.
I'm not overly fussed about those things.
Would you say macro is more important than micro?
100%. I think there comes a skill level, and then you have to be like really high up there. Where both macros is essentially at roughly the same level, and micro differences really start to matter a lot.
Yeah.
But the percentage of the player base that's at that level is so insanely small that it's just macros where it's at. And also just like we said, like I said earlier, he's gonna build up that gold bank. Just all these sort of things where like this spawn was insanely beautiful. He has double deer pack and a boar. And like this is great, right? Like if I had this spawn, I would have a really good time.
The opponent now reached Castle Age, and it's Byzantines Castle Age, and we didn't exactly get full control of the opponent's base here. Do you think that there is a way now for Julius to actually get into this game and try to win this over, or should he go to do castle, or maybe just surrender and go next?
It is definitely winnable. I would just make a lot of units and try to deny the food sources. There's no backberries in this game, which is nice. Yeah, so the problem with playing Archer and Knight is that you always need more micro than your opponent. So this works out for him, but in general, playing Spears is nicer, right? I would just go towards the gold. Don't just attack from the front. He's not gonna go back to those berries anymore.
Yeah, because
So
he's already here, right? So there's no point in really staying here. With more like maybe one archer can be dropped here just to monitor the area. But really the main focus should be on actually pushing the base now, because the longer that goes, the more time the opponent has to build up again after an army loss, right?
yeah, and so what happens sometimes is that you would attack from this side, like you would go inside this wall and then you attack from the bottom. And that means you're essentially playing without reinforcements, because you're not going to be able to get your reinforcements there easily, and then they might run it through the TC or something. So I would have just built those ramps at like the front stone mine, and just attack from the front.
Yeah. Yeah, there's definitely an issue with reinforcement. Like, if you have all your units coming this way and they're going this way around as well, the opponent will very easily just be taking cavalry or longbow spearmats and sniping a few of these units, keeping your units low. and that's probably the main issue from attacking from this angle. And again, you're also probably too far away from actual targets for your rams. So when the rams have to travel this distance, it's easier for the opponent just to pick on them in the first place.
Yeah, and if you come from the top and you go on the gold, then his gold is denied, and you definitely want to deny Castle Age upgrades and units. So
yeah, absolutely. The odds for this fight are actually surprisingly good, provided that the archers snipe down the spearmen, because the knights will do good damage to both horsemen and longbows. So honestly, this fight here turns out rather good and provides really good odds for finishing the game, I would say. Like, this is a good position.
he's in a good position now, and the only thing I dislike is that he's attacking from the bottom instead of from the top. But he's in a good position here, and I would definitely hard press my win here. I would probably look to call Gremlins as well soon enough.
Yep.
They can just tank the TC for me, and I'm just gonna really get in there.
Yep. Yeah, and that's the issue right now. We're not getting in there while we have an advantage. Something like sniping out production buildings is really important, and if you can't take out the production buildings because they're maybe too far away and there's units there, just take out the farms, do as much eco damage as possible. Idle rams at this stage of the game is probably the worst thing that can happen to you.
Yeah, and our food eco fell flat, but we're also not producing, so like we're finally going to that tier now after running the marathon. Yeah, regardless, the resources are not spent anyway, so the main thing is spend those res.
Yeah, we don't want to be sitting on over 3,000 resources when we're doing a final push here. That's when we want those resources to be units. It's so many units that we could have potentially had at this stage. It's not uncommon to see at the high level where people spend all their res and are effective with their macro to have, 40 archers and 20 knights, 30 knights at this stage of the game.
Yeah, and it's funny, right? Like, you can see all these mistakes, but we're still in a winning position at this stage, I would say.
Yeah.
But we have to get that. If we get that production going, and if we call the gremlins, I think we win the game here.
So really, you have your archers to snipe out crossbows and spears, and then the knights will take care of the rest of it.
I think this is definitely losable, just because you're under the TC.
You think it's losable?
Yeah, I mean, just the fact that you're under the TC, you're gonna be bleeding units, and your opponent, if you're gonna lay off the pressure, he's gonna stabilize. He has to be gathering food somewhere. He's not on the farms. So I would have checked those front berries, and because I saw the house there, I was like, maybe there's a mill there as well.
Yeah.
And then I would have checked the hunt after. That's like the easiest path to win. Is not necessarily be under the TC. Just keep him off the farms, keep him off the hunt and the berries, and he's not going to be able to produce anything. I think I always like to do whenever you're at minute 20 is you calculate how many vills you should have and how much you have. So 20 minutes, you train 3 vills a minute, so 20 times 3 is 60, and you start with 6, so you should be on 66 vills at the moment.
Yeah.
So we've been rated 20 vills this game. In fact, we haven't been rated, so we didn't train 20 vills.
Yeah,
which is
20 villager loss is massive.
Yeah, it's third of our eco.
That's what would cause most players to probably tap out at a Conqueror level and higher, or at least consider whether it's still winnable. And so it's really, really bad to have a 20 villager loss that's not even caused by the opponent.
Yeah, so what I could recommend people to do if you're looking to improve, open your own replay, pause it at minute 20. You can go into caster mode to see how many vills you lost if you may have been rated.
Yeah.
So in this case 0, but maybe it was like 5, and then you just do what I just did, where you multiply the minutes times 3 plus 6 from your starting, and then you know how many fills of idle time you've had, and if that number is above 10, then that should be like your main concern. Like let's look at Julius Eco right now. He's following 2k food. Let's say he had 10 vills in queue, and then he's floating 1500 food. So nothing changes, but the TC is always working. So if he would play with having always 10 vills in queue, people see that as a mistake. People see that as like, well, you should only have 1 in queue, and then you have 450 food more. But
what do you think about Rams attacking the main TC?
I mean, I don't like it, obviously.
Yeah.
I would just go for the... I mean, I would have just denied the food, right? I wouldn't... I would just deny these farms and deny the hunts, and then he can't produce anything, and you just win.
Yeah.
But this all in is like the one opportunity to lose the game, I think.
That's a good way to put it. One opportunity to lose the game is to hyper-focus on the TC. The TC is never a victory condition until there are no other victory conditions left. You wouldn't go for the TC. You want to sort of prioritize raiding economy, denying food. You've talked about it before. I remember you coached me and you talked about this idea of food starving the opponent. You sort of strangle your opponent by denying them food sources. And then if you're also here on these farms, there would simply be no income for the opponent. That would be a very good way to deal with this. The Rams themselves should probably be targeting production first, then economy, and then landmarks when there's nothing left to go for. Maybe bring to a TLDR here, where what are the main focus points for this player to go forward with? Maybe you want to start with that?
I would personally just focus on training vills first of all, which is just like super basic, it's super standard, everybody's gonna say it all the time, but it's just like, if you're down 20 vills at minute 20 because of idle time, then ignore all the rest for a while and make sure at some point that number goes below 10, right? Like, check your own replays, and if that number doesn't go below 10, then just figure out how you get there, because having that be at 20 is horrible.
I think it's a good point. Yeah, you definitely want to start with the basics. Fundamental stuff matters a lot more than matchup specific stuff. I think overall the strategy is the correct one. The execution of it was wrong. So yeah, there's a lot of things that are hampering and sort of delaying us, or just in general reducing the effectiveness of our strat. And those are macro issues. Those are our gatherers on the different resources and idle time cost from moving a lot. Not scaling production and stuff like that. But it all comes down in the end to, are you spending your resources on villagers first and foremost, and then units, and the list goes on. Again, the video has been going into more details, obviously, but yeah, those are the most important thing. And I think Julius has a long way to go, but I'm also seeing a lot of good things. The aggression is certainly sorely lacking in a lot of players. They play more passively, so this is a good way to start. Keep doing this, as this is definitely the correct way.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I was pleased to see he wasn't going second TC or anything like that. Because pretty common when you play 2TC, you still have less vills than somebody could produce from one. Just like, don't bother with all that stuff. And it's like, for example, I just saw his wood line, and it's horrible, right? Like, his walking time is just like double, like the efficiency is halved, and all these things. Just keep in mind that it doesn't matter. Like, it's really bad, but it doesn't matter if you're playing at this level. Just focus on those basics.